Hey there, this is me, Malorian, and this will be another video for new players. And what this topic is going to be is one that was requested quite a bit, and it was, Malorian, can you go and tell us what's kind of like a summary of what each faction is about? Now, before I get into all that, I am going to say that there is no definite answer here. This is something where if I was to come out and say yeah, this faction's this and this faction's that, I would be wrong. And the reason for that is because the factions aren't really just like paper, rock, scissors. There's a lot of depth to them. There's lots of different options. You can run these things in lots of different ways. So I'm going to say that as a caveat right now, that even though I'm going to do my best for a new player to say okay, in general, this is what this army is all about, do realize that as I say that, a lot of these armies and factions can be run in a lot of different ways. Let's just start with our first one here. So I'm going to be going through all the War Machine ones first, and then all the Hordes ones. And the very first one I'm going to touch on from War Machine is Cygnar. Now, Cygnar can kind of be seen as kind of like the good guys of the game. They're kind of like the star team, and they're kind of more like the elite fighters. So if you're comparing them to some of the other stuff, you'll see that their stats are just that little bit higher. They got some very powerful stuff in there, but they're also normally seen as like the shooting faction. They have lots of really good guns. So elite and shooty. And again, I'm going to use this as my example because you could run these guys with lots of infantry, you could run them with lots of cavalry, you could run them with lots of jacks, you could run them with a lot of battle engines, you could be doing lots of swords, you could be doing lots of guns, you could be doing lots of magic. There's lots of different ways you can build these, especially for some more of these original factions that really have a lot of options. But again, if I am forced to do this topic and I have a new player who's saying Cygnar, in one sentence, what is that kind of all about? Elite, shooty. That's kind of usually what you're going to kind of see there. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's kind of go through the other ones here. The next one's going to be Protectorate of Menoth. Now, if I was to kind of summarize this faction, it's going to be, they're more of the church boys. You see a lot of religious themes through all these things here. And they're a lot about sacrifice and fire. So there's a lot of things in here that's immune to fire, that does fire damage, and there's a lot of stuff in this here where you're kind of sacrificing one thing to something else. This is something that's kind of changed a little bit over time, so that's not as pure as a theme anymore, but I'd still say top three, those are kind of the main things you're looking at. Kind of churchy and fire, and then the other one's going to be kind of sacrifice. I suppose another thing you could be saying there too for the way that it plays is systematic, because there's really a lot of triggers you want to do this first all the time, then this. But again, I don't want to get too much into that, but that's the kind of general idea of what you're looking at for that faction. Next one's Khador, and this one is kind of interesting because if you were to try and get a theme and what this thing's all about, they're kind of like the Russian faction. They're made to be a lot with if you were thinking of Soviet Russia, this is how a lot of things are kind of really made up to look, and their jacks are kind of these big beefy things. Now, they're kind of seen as the high armor faction, which can be a little bit of a misleading thing as well, because they don't really have a lot of things in faction that raise armor. So say it's very easy for Cygnar to get higher armor than Khador, but Khador is usually seen as the high armor faction. So it's kind of a mix there. And again, if you're looking at what you're normally seeing as far as in the list, it's usually kind of more combined arms, where you're seeing some guns, some jacks, some axe to go to face, that type of a thing. So that's what they're kind of about, is the Russian aesthetic, and then kind of a mixed bag of what you'll normally be putting into a single list, as usually things have to kind of work together. The next one's going to be Cryx. Now this is going to be your undead skeletons type of one. You're normally going to be seeing lots and lots and lots of dudes, lots of infantry all the time, and a lot of undead models. And if you are a new player and don't know what that's all about, there's a lot of rules that only affect living things. So coming to Cryx and seeing a lot of things that are undead or incorporeal, it really throws a real spin on things. Again, you can now see things with a lot of raiders, which are more the statistics, kind of like pirate ladies, which are all living, so that's not undead. And they have a new Jack theme, which is amazing, so you could totally see a whole bunch of Jacks. But in general, they're kind of like your undead group that's going to be coming across with all their zombies and ghosts and skeletons and things, and just waves of undead coming towards you. Is like, you know, the stereotype going for them. Next one is going to be the Retribution of Skyra, and them is going to be more so of like the elite elves. If you're going to try and think of an idea to them, again, their stats are a little bit higher, but they're even a little bit higher in terms of being a little bit more specialized than Cygnar. You know, if you look at a Cygnar Jack or something like that, it'll have some higher stats. Its weapon skill will be a little bit higher. Its rat will be a little bit higher. Here in Rat, you're going to see that, but you're going to see some extra like rules and all these things here. So everything's just a little bit more specialized and just a little bit more elite. You also really see a lot of the things here where there is the combined arms approach that usually works its way into this list. Again, there's lots of ways you can run it, but mainly if you're a person who kind of really likes like an anime look or an elf look or kind of like a futuristic type of thing, like if you came in from Infinity or something like that, this might be the one for you. Next one's going to be Convergence, and I'm going to say for Convergence Osiris, if you're a new player, this is probably not one that you want to start with. It's all about robots. It's all about we're going to be leaving our bodies behind. We just want to be dealing with turning ourselves into machines, and all of these things are robots. And so that sounds like it's a really cool thing that a lot of people like, but it's the mechanics of the way that they work that really turns into kind of like a puzzle that you're going to have to always be putting together. And what I mean by that is that whereas other ones, like, okay, I allocate my focus and off you go, this is going to have to be like, okay, I'm going to allocate here, it's going to come over here and do this, which will give a focus there, then it can come over here, and it's going to boost and allocate this here, boost this other one, allocate there, then they can do this, and it can get really, really complicated. It doesn't have to be, but again, it's just that extra complication that as a new player, I probably steer them away from that. Alright, so the next one up after Convergence is going to be Crucible Guard. Now, Crucible Guard, that's a tough one because they're brand new. They're the new faction for this year. But in general, what you're seeing from these guys is that these are kind of like the alchemists. These are all the scientists. They're dealing with all the different effects, corrosion and acid and fire and all these other things, freezing things. And so you'll be seeing a lot of stuff here that uses those different effects, and then in ways that the whole list has to be kind of be working together. Like first this unit goes and it's going to be doing these effects, which then allows this unit to come in and kind of do their thing. So very interesting. You know, that whole alchemist scientist type of feel you get from it can be, again, a little bit more complicated to play, so I don't know if it'd be the best thing to do for a new player as well. You know, whereas the first four I talked about, Cygnar, Menoth, Khador, and Cryx, are kind of like some of the original factions that have a large amount of models. Convergence and Crucible Guard don't have as much. Now, Retribution is kind of in the middle, where they're kind of brought in after a lot of the original stuff, so they have a good amount of things, but I mean, they don't have as many options as, say, like Cryx and Khador and Cygnar, but they do have more than, say, like Crucible Guard and Convergence. So again, I mean, that's not really the theme and what they're all about, but again, if you're wanting to kind of get an understanding of the faction coming in, those are things you got to keep in mind. Last one that's in there is Mercenaries, and Mercenaries is kind of exactly what you'd think of it. There's a whole bunch of different options, lots of different choices, lots of different specialized units that originally you would see kind of scattered going through all the other factions because they were mercenaries and they'd be working for other groups. Although now, because of the way that themes work, you don't normally see that. You might see somebody taking like a mercenary solo or something like that, but it's not as common to be seeing as many mercenary options taken as it used to be, say like back in Mark II. So right now, the way it is, then I would try and say that they're a very infantry more so based list. Their main theme right now is going to kind of really push a lot of those infantry options they have, although they have a lot of great jacks as well. So maybe the best way to say for them is just specialization and value. So if you want things super cheap, they got some super cheap options. If you need some things that are really good at doing X, they have that option. They have a lot of stuff there you can kind of work together. So that's why I play them, because I love them and they work very well. Alright, we're now going to be moving over to Hordes. So this is now the version that has all the Fury rather than Focus. And the ones that they have right now is, first of all, Troll Blood. So you get all these trolls, and the big thing you got to think about for these things is, I mean, the kind of the aesthetic that goes on these is that if you had trolls that came from Scotland, that's kind of like the idea you're getting there. You're normally going to be seeing lots of infantry, and as well, you don't see a lot of like small base infantry like you'll see in other ones. It's medium based, and for new players who might not have a good understanding for this, that can cause a lot of problems, because a unit that used to take up this much space is now taking up this much space, and trying to maneuver that around while other models and units and terrain can be a little bit of a challenge. I mean, you'd think that going up a base size is not that big of a deal, but it is. The other thing is, of course, they have the tough rule going all the way through. So again, if you took some trolls, made them live in Scotland, and then just took a bunch of them and made them all tough and made them go fight, that's kind of what your trolls are all about. Again, this is all big time generalizations. I'm just trying to give something for new players. Next one is your Circle Orboros, and what this one's all about is really the forest. And if you're thinking about like druids and hippies and all that type of thing, that's really what they're all about. You know, they have all like the stone golems that are going to be putting together to defend the forest type thing. You have all these kind of druids like I talked about. We got these werewolf things that come from the forest, wolves, things like that. That's really what you're getting here. And what you'll normally see from this faction is usually a little bit more beast heavy, and they're a little bit more based about the alpha strike. They want to be getting in there, hitting hard, and then maybe retreating, or if nothing else, coming in first, hitting hard, and then trying to hit so hard that you can't really fight back as well. So if you're a person that likes that type of a style, get in and attack, do your thing, and then maybe do like hit and run tactics or something like that, this might be the faction for you. Next one's going to be Legion Everblight. These things are kind of like all these demonic creatures that are made from, you know, dragon blood and all this type of stuff. Really, you do see a very wide variety of lists coming from here. So maybe the best way I could say right now is that they're combined arms as well, where you see a lot of beasts, a lot of infantry, and a mixture of things. It really is hard to kind of like generalize them right now, but so if I'm going to go more for the aesthetic, they are a little bit more about like the demonic creatures. So if you like the idea of like demons, you might like them. They're a little bit of glass cannons though, where they can do really effective and do some really good attacks, but defensive wise, they're not really the best. So if they ever get attacked, they can go down fairly quickly. They're not like really like glass cannons where like if they get touched something they just shatter, but they are kind of on the weaker side compared to some of the other things you'll see from the other options. Scorn, I wish I could just say sucked and is garbage and I could laugh at them. That's what they kind of used to be, but they're not anymore. And so really, if you were to try and take like a Genghis Khan type of theme from like this kind of like this Asian type of thing that has like that type of armor plating type thing and the flags and the swords type stuff, but then decided to make all their beasts like elephants and cyclopses. That's kind of what they're all about. So they're not so much about guns, they're not so much about like magical stuff, they're more so about like, let's gather the troops and get over there and kick your butt. They have really changed over the years, so they're nothing like what they used to be. They're very powerful, and probably, again, it's the best way if you're trying to picture what these are all about. They're not so much about guns, they're not so much about magic. This is kind of like this Genghis Khan, elephants and cyclopses that want to go across the board and kick your butt. So that's probably the best way to look at scoring right now. They're going to Grymkin. Grymkin is another fairly new faction. Whereas I told you Crystal Guard just came out, the one before that was Grymkin, and they're all about like fairy tales and nightmares and that type of stuff, right? So when you're looking at them, they're like, you know, the dudes with pitchforks and pumpkin heads, these crazy grotesque beasts, you know, covered in skin and stuff like this that have been kind of like pieced together. You know, it's that type of aesthetic. Another warning I'll make here though is that it's not normally the best one, I'd say, for newer players, because they're a little bit different than all the other factions. Whereas a lot of other times for other ones, hey, you got your caster with your once a game feat. These guys have their arcana, which you get 3 of them for the most part, to do like one time each during the course of the game, and that can make things a little bit more complicated. I wouldn't say it's as hard to try and figure that out as it is the convergence, but still, I'd still say this is one of those armies that, unless you're more so getting into for the painting, because again, these newer models look fantastic. If you're a person who's getting into the game for the gameplay and you're brand new to it and maybe you don't have as much experience with it, with playing tabletop games, this might be one you want to be giving a pass on. But again, very cool nightmares and fairy tale type of faction. The last one to talk about is Minions, and I gotta kind of say they're kind of like a worse mercenaries, but to be, you know, more honest and fair to them, they really have 2 parts to them. Even though they are really like one faction, they're really pigs and alligators, and kind of like all mixed together with some other fun things together. You really don't see a lot of pig stuff because it's seen as kind of a little bit weak. The alligator parts can be very strong and resilient. A big thing I'll say here if you're a new player is that there's just not a lot of options in the Minions. You know, whereas the mercenaries have been out a long time, and these are supposed to be like the mercenaries of the Horde side, they just don't have as many options. And because the warlocks are very restrictive of this one can only take alligators, this one can only take pigs, it takes your limited faction and then cuts it in half. So it makes things a little bit more complicated. I know some people really love the look of, or the feel of playing with all these alligators, or a lot of these pig models look very cool and interesting and different. But for the most part, you will find these pig models that say like their war beasts are kind of weaker than you would expect for what their point costs are. They probably need to be a little bit of a vamp up. And the alligators though are fairly strong, but at the same time you're very limited in what you can actually run with them. I mean, there's one alligator unit, that's kind of it. That's what you got, right? So it's that type of limitation. So even though I want to keep this video more to like what are they generally about and what do they look like, again, as a warning to new players, I think it would be wrong for me not to bring this up. So anyway, there you go. There's kind of like a summary of all the factions and War Machine and Hordes. If you feel that anything I said was wrong and you describe things a different way, please post it down below. And as well, I want to keep this thing going with what you guys want to be hearing. So if there's any other topics you want me to talk about, please post that down below. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you later. Bye.